The death toll from at least one tornado today now stands at 5. A massive storm ripped across much of the northeastern part of the state, with reports of many tornadoes twisting through several communities.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly. Today we're going to be talking about a tornado disaster that I genuinely don't think gets talked about enough. The Parkersburg tornado of 2008 is the second ever tornado in the United States to have been given an EF-5 rating, second to the Greensburg tornado, which happened just a year before. And before the Greensburg tornado, the last F5 rated tornado in the United States was the Moore, Oklahoma tornado of 1999. So the weight of a tornado receiving an F or EF5 rating is both heavy and very rare. So keeping all those things in mind, this is the story of the Parkersburg EF5 tornado. Parkersburg is a small town in Butler County, Iowa, seated about 80 miles northeast of Des Moines. The city got its beginnings in the mid-19th century when John Connell and his son William built a log cabin in 1857. Several years later, a railroad company would scout the area, and from there, the city would slowly begin to grow. And Parkersburg has always been, since its establishment, a small town. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your family, people have seen your children grow up. Nothing major happens here. It's quiet, and that's exactly the charm of a town like Parkersburg, that small town feeling that really draws people in to live there for generations. But unfortunately for Parkersburg, it was about to experience a trial beyond what most people would ever have to endure in their entire lives. When you look at Iowa, it is inside the ever ambiguous Tornado Alley, and having had some of the most F5 rated tornadoes in the country, the state of Iowa is more than familiar with a tornado or two. In fact, Iowa is often highly ranked for historically having some of the most violent tornadoes since the year 1950. Generally speaking, certain months are correlated with having higher tornado frequencies in that area. For example, the months of March through May are often associated with peak tornado activity in the southern states, while June and July are often associated with being peak activity in the northern plains and Midwest. But May of 2008 spared nobody. The entire month seemingly was riddled with tornadoes through a large swath of the country. So let's take a look at the environment that would inevitably spawn one of this century's most violent storms. In the days leading up to the infamous Parkersburg tornado, the environment had already been incredibly volatile, but particularly between May 23rd through May 31st, where multiple severe weather outbreaks would ravage portions of the mid and southwest. In just 9 days, over 239 confirmed tornadoes would take 13 lives and cause over $343 million in damage, with several EF3 tornadoes, one EF4, and of course the Parkersburg EF5. So having already issued multiple high-risk days that had verified, the forecasters at the Des Moines NWS office are already on high alert. So by May 20th, 2008, when a surface low is showing up on models projected to move into northern Minnesota, there was naturally some concern on what that progression might look like. Erring on the side of caution, the Des Moines office issues their Day 5 outlook to include a possibility of a multiple day threat for relatively widespread storms. The very next day, as the event is now getting closer, now in the Day 4 outlook, forecasters note, and now Notably, forecasters are seeing the potential for tornadoes. As the days passed, in conjunction with other atmospheric elements present, it was now apparent that severe weather wasn't just possible, but looking likely. But interestingly enough, the initial concern wasn't for Iowa specifically. The main concern just 2 days before the Parkersburg tornado had been the ever infamous triple point, which was forecasted to set up over southern Minnesota, not Iowa. So now it's the night before the Parkersburg tornado, and at this point, while the concern isn't initially for Iowa for tornadoes specifically, that was very quickly about to change. It's now early in the morning on Sunday, May 25th, 2008. At 2 a.m. on Sunday, May 25th, the SPC issues their first initial Day 1 outlook. And initially with this very first update, there is a slight risk over a large swath of the country, and this slight risk was combined notably with a 10% hatched risk for tornadoes. Until the next update at 8 a.m., the atmosphere was very rapidly changing. Now, by the time of the 8 a.m. update, the SPC decides to upgrade the slight risk to now include 2 areas of moderate risks, one being over central Kansas, and the second one notably over portions of western Wisconsin and eastern Minnesota. Iowa isn't in these moderate risks at all. And the reason that Iowa was not placed in the sort of target area or in a higher tornado probability was because at this point, the SPC was thinking that Iowa would be more in the damaging wind category. And this was because all the models that they had been looking at were actually really downplaying the growing instability that would inevitably be directly over Iowa in the coming hours. Now, here's where things start to get interesting. By early afternoon over central Iowa, although projected to remain mostly cloudy with lower temperatures, the skies started to clear up, quite rapidly, in fact. Some areas in Iowa went from a 59 degree with a 55 degree dew point at 8 in the morning to an 84 degree temperature with a 70 degree dew point by early afternoon. So along with those very quickly rising temperatures, so did the instability values follow. And with higher instability in Cape, as we know, there is ample energy for storms to feed off of, energy that supercells love. Some places in Iowa by the early afternoon would see over 3,500 joules per kilogram of Cape, which is way more than enough to produce strong storms, which can produce tornadoes. So now it's just after 2 p.m. in central Iowa, and now that the instability is present, Iowa is quickly becoming the target for potential severe weather.
Tell that the instability certainly was getting pretty high during the day, and I started checking my phone, checking my radar app.
We get something to form in that environment, we knew that it would be explosive.
It's now just after 2:30 p.m. and a cluster of storms are beginning to form near Fort Dodge in western Iowa. And at this point, although the storms are fairly strong, they still haven't reached that prime atmosphere in central and eastern Iowa yet. By early afternoon, the mesoanalysis showed numerous thermodynamic and wind shear values in the range of concern for violent and long-track tornadoes, and we can see this by the soundings done for the region. It's also noted and almost implied in a lot of the retrospective studies done on the Parkersburg storm that a gravity wave had some kind of influence on perhaps the intensification of the Parkersburg storm and ultimately the tornado. I don't personally know that much about gravity waves. I do know that in the past they have had some interesting influence on storms like Jarrell, for example. So if I can find something, I will link some research for you to read through if you're interested in that. By 3:30 p.m., seeing all these atmospheric ingredients come together for now potentially a really violent day in central Iowa, the National Weather Service decides to issue a PDS tornado watch, a particularly dangerous situation watch, over central and eastern Iowa, which would include Parkersburg. By this point, spotters are being deployed throughout numerous counties within central and eastern Iowa to keep an eye on those storms that are progressing from the west. The series of storms that ultimately contained what would go on to become the Parkersburg supercell and tornado had already formed. It's in western Iowa, moving eastward, about to enter that primed, ripe atmosphere. Sometime just after 4 o'clock, as those storms are entering the volatile atmosphere, they are very quickly taking supercellular structure, and one is becoming more dominant. All the ingredients have come together for this storm, and it's ready to produce something massive. Just a few short minutes later, by 4:22 p.m., the rotation is strong enough that the National Weather Service decides to go ahead and issue a tornado warning for this rotation, seeing that a tornado is inevitable.
It is there.
There it is.
Where's Bucket?
He's in the garage.
I think we better go down. Dad!
It's not compacting except over on the left-hand edge. There's the tornado siren.
At 4:45 p.m., now just 2 miles southwest of the small town of Applington, the supercell produces and touches down. The Parkersburg tornado has just been born.
Train spotter reported a large tornado on the ground near the intersection of Highway D17. It is in the warned area, and it's an extremely dangerous and life-threatening situation right now to the east of Applington.
It's right on top of him, isn't it? Wow, it's getting close over here. Now you can hear it. Oh shit.
Let's get inside.
All right.
Within the first few seconds of being down, spotters are already on the storm, and the twister is wasting no time in becoming a very impressive size. The tornado is moving east through Butler County, and it's now very quickly becoming apparent that Parkersburg is directly in its path. By 4:51 p.m., the sirens are already going off in Parkersburg, giving the residents some time to get into shelter. And that's thanks to spotters who were able to confirm, law enforcement who helped confirm the tornado as well. This gave the people a few extra minutes to get to safety, and those few extra minutes make a huge difference. Just as the tornado is approaching the southwestern tip of Parkersburg, it's already a staggering 3/4 of a mile wide.
Ciao.
Oh my God. Does that go from there?
Yes. We better shut this door.
And at 4:56 p.m., the tornado enters Parkersburg.
Certainly the structure of this storm is very, very characteristic of a large tornado, and certainly that is the statement now from the National Weather Service, a large tornado. That would include Parkersburg, also now of greatest danger, you folks in Waverly.
Immediately upon entering the southwestern corner of town, the first thing the tornado encounters are dozens of homes, and it's already hitting at such violent intensity.
What? Is she okay? Okay, you're at Stickley's? Okay, stay in the bathtub.
It's as soon as this tornado enters the southwestern corner of the town of Parkersburg that it's doing some of its most intense damage in its lifetime. The tornado was traveling directly eastward across Highway 57 and 14. Again, this is primarily an area of mostly homes. as the tornado continued to churn over the small town. Although at this point only hitting homes, the tornado now hits a few businesses, including 2 banks, the elementary school, and eventually into the high school. And because the town of Parkersburg itself is so small, the twister at 3/4 of a mile wide is engulfing all of these homes and businesses, all within just a minute or two. Within just 5 very short and horrifying minutes, over 150 to 200 homes would be completely engulfed and destroyed by this tornado at EF-4 and EF-5 intensity. That means they are essentially wiped clean.
Holy fuck, Russ, look, it's huge. Now! Get in the cooler, quick! It's right by Parkersburg lumber! Slam that shut! Where's John and everybody? Get away from that glass over there, girls, boys! Get down! Get away from that glass!
We may have a very large tornado on the ground, but certainly we're going to continue. Let's see here. It looks like more reports coming in. A large tornado passing east of Parkersburg may have hit the south end of Parkersburg.
The tornado has now crossed over a majority of the southern edge of Parkersburg, but it was about to get even more intense. As the tornado is exiting off the eastern end of the Parkersburg residence, it produces its most violent damage in its lifetime, EF-5 damage across multiple homes. These were the homes that would ultimately be slabbed. Only the foundation remained with nothing on top. The tornado ultimately didn't spend that long over Parkersburg. It didn't need to. With its width and intensity, in under 10 minutes, the town of Parkersburg was destroyed.
So those of you, although not in a warning in Black Hawk County, you want to be very, very careful as this storm moves in. These storms not only have a history of producing a tornado, large hail, some very, very intense lightning and heavy rains, but these are storms that can hold together for a long period of time.
It's now 4:59 p.m. and Parkersburg has just taken a direct hit from an EF-5 tornado. And at this point, despite having unleashed such raw power on Parkersburg, this twister was far from done producing violent damage. It's at this point also between Parkersburg and New Hartford that a windrow of debris would be noted in open cornfields. You can see from the kind of ground scouring and the damage it did to trees that this was still a very, very violent storm. Continuing its track eastward by 5:09 p.m., the tornado now moves through the New Hartford area, causing significant tree and structural damage at, once again, EF-4 and EF-5 intensity.
Let's say up toward New Hartford right now. That's the area you really, really want to be on the lookout right now as the storm moves in.
The latest update as of 5 o'clock from the National Weather Service, trained weather spotters still following a tornado now.
Oh, Father, I just pray that you would protect everyone in the path of that storm.
After having ravaged multiple towns at this point, the twister is starting to lose a little bit of momentum. At this point, it's 5:26 p.m. The tornado has been going on for almost an hour at this point, and it's still going. Up next are the northern areas of Waterloo and Cedar Falls. The silver lining here is that although there was destruction in northern Cedar Falls and Waterloo, they did not take a direct hit, and it was also not in the violent range category. As the twister moved over the northern portions of Cedar Falls and Waterloo's, it would be at EF-2 to EF-3 intensity. It's here that the tornado starts to act a little bit more erratically. It's now varying in forward velocity and taking sudden abrupt turns. And at this point, having unleashed so much violence on multiple towns, the tornado is finally starting to reach the end of its life. The tornado inflicts its final damage on one last farmstead, and at 5:58 p.m., just to the southwest of Fairbank, the infamous twister would finally die off. In just 1 hour, untold damage has occurred in central Iowa.
The house is completely obliterated.
Get to the left here.
Yeah,
Just stop. We gotta go into rescue. Massive destruction, large gas leaks, flattened houses. I'm very serious.
This is KCRG TV9 News at 10.
Deadly severe weather tears through eastern Iowa today, leaving devastation in its wake. The worst community hit appears to be Parkersburg. Now take a look at this video. A tornado leveled parts of the town this afternoon. Tonight, Governor Chet Culver has issued a disaster proclamation for Black Hawk and Butler counties. He says the state will do whatever it can to support local emergency management teams as they help the communities destroyed by at least, again, one tornado.
Immediately after the tornado, it was apparent that Parkersburg had sustained the brunt of this storm. Looking at the immediate damage photos after reminds me very much of Joplin with how widespread the damage is. It's almost as if you cannot see the end of the damage.
Claire, so far we know 2 people are dead here in Parkersburg and many more have had injuries. There were ambulances coming and going from Parkersburg all afternoon and well into the evening as well. You can see behind me, these were people's homes, and now it pretty much just looks like a pile of debris and rubble.
The kind of damage that had just been done in Parkersburg meant that the leveling and complete destruction of homes, foundations being swept clean, meant that the very first priority was to find people, do a search and rescue operation. And what you see when you come across a disaster area like Parkersburg just after a tornado has hit, it's not just the destruction. You are seeing people screaming and crying out. You're seeing people injured or perhaps not living anymore. It's the gas leaks and the smell of pine that hits you. It's live lines on the road, things that are so unnatural and so unfathomable for us to see on a large scale.
There's kind of an underlying sense of grief. They know that 5 friends and family members and neighbors have lost their lives here. Town itself is under a curfew tonight. That curfew kicked into effect at 8 o'clock. We're in a subdivision just to the east of town, and take a look. These are 2 vehicles that were parked in a 3-car garage. This is pretty much all that's left of this house.
The difference between EF-3 and EF-5 damage, EF-3.
A quiet Memorial Day weekend in Parkersburg turned into a terrifying, devastating disaster in a matter of minutes.
You just heard creaking and cracking and everything.
All I saw was the biggest black wall in my life. I couldn't even tell. I didn't think it was a tornado.
Neighbors tried to help each other once the wind died down, but the shock was just too much for some people.
He was trying to get out of the basement, and we tried to help him, and then he was okay, but then he had a heart attack and died.
And one of the elements to consider also when we talk about search and rescues being done in a smaller town like Parkersburg is that although it might be easier to account for everybody considering that the population is under 2,000, that also means that the people who are conducting the search and rescue, the firefighters, policemen, and volunteers, are coming across people that they know. Perhaps it's a friend or a loved one or a coworker. So during the process of search and rescue, the police chief Christopher Luring had said one of his main goals and the goals of the search and rescue team was to find a dignified place, essentially a makeshift morgue for the victims. Initially, he was estimating between 70 to 100 victims. It would be ultimately significantly less than that. Granted, when you look at the damage photos from Parkersburg, and it's, as far as the eye can see of homes completely destroyed, I can understand where they would estimate that the total number of potential victims would have been much higher than it actually was.
Further development.
When I initially realized we needed a morgue, and I knew for a fact my family was going to be put there, and my aunt was. She was placed in the morgue. I had no morgue training. That's not something you learn at the Law Enforcement Academy. In an incident command, I knew that it had to be at the fire station in my head. When I got there, I didn't have maps. I didn't really have anything. I had a small, 6x6 map in my squad car. That was the first map that I used, along with other folks, to send out first responders to the appropriate location.
Shortly after the devastation is beginning to be realized by the National Weather Service and outside authorities, helicopters were called in to take aerial surveys of the area to get a better understanding of just how widespread and devastating the tornado had actually been. By 10 a.m. the very next morning, a team of seasoned meteorologists and engineers would come out to survey the storm. And it didn't take long for them to realize that this was beyond an EF-3 tornado. So in that case, when it's above an EF-3 tornado, the National Weather Service usually will request to the headquarters to initiate a quick response team. And the purpose of that is to have experts in wind damage, expert engineers come out to do a more thorough and extensive report on the degree of damage to understand fully what rating to give violent tornadoes such as this one. The aerial and ground surveys showed that the tornado traveled east, with 98% of the track moving through rural farmland and the remaining 2% moving over Parkersburg. According to the city and the survey, 282 homes were destroyed, over 300 sustained some kind of damage, 22 businesses and 37 assisted living residents as well. And in total, that's about 1/3 of the entire town of Parkersburg. The survey also found that the width of the tornado as it moved over Parkersburg was about 3/4 of a mile, and the total distance traveled by this twister would be some 43 miles, with a maximum wind speed of 205 miles per hour. The preliminary result was a low-end EF-5 tornado in Butler County in both Parkersburg and New Hartford. Widespread EF-2 damage was found in Black Hawk County as the tornado widened near the end of its life cycle, unquote. So that was what they listed in the subsequent survey. It was a low-end EF-5. After going through and extensively verifying all the information on the surveys, the National Weather Service scheduled a conference to publicly discuss the rating of the Parkersburg tornado. Interestingly enough, the rating was actually leaked beforehand to the press somehow. I imagine that came from someone internally, but I don't think it was much of a surprise to a lot of people who saw the damage photos in Parkersburg that this tornado garnered an EF-5 rating. There would ultimately be 7 fatalities within the city of Parkersburg, and for the entire tornado there would be 9. Officials said that at least one of the victims in Parkersburg had actually been in their basement, but they were actually killed when the foundation was swept clean and the basement was therefore exposed, and they were taken out of the basement. And this is one of the really tragic truths about EF4 to EF5, the upper echelon of tornadoes, is that a lot of times there's almost nothing you can do. They are so violent and so destructive that being in a home at all, unless it's an underground shelter, they're in some ways almost unsurvivable. Outside of the few fatalities that were discovered, there were a couple dozen people who were injured by flying debris who needed to be taken to hospitals. Now, again, we are going to be referencing the surveys done by the National Weather Service. Again, this is easily one of the most comprehensive surveys that I've ever read. One of the most important things in here is a list of findings that are not necessarily the shortcomings, but the things that could have been done better during, prior to, and after the event. One of the main findings that I found to be really interesting is that the morning day 1 update from the SPC, the outlook that we talked about, had actually diminished the tornado threat and favored straight line damaging winds, particularly over Iowa. One of the recommendations was that they should have used stronger language to really warn the public of the potential for a high ceiling day. If it's warranted, strong language should be used for high ceiling days. That was kind of the point. But instead, this office had sort of used the same kind of verbiage for the past 5 days and not really indicating any level of more severity. Finding number 5 is interesting because it points out that a lot of the tornado watches that were issued for the day were pretty confusing. Having consistent information go out to the general public is one of the most important parts of relaying that critical information, is not to confuse people, because it doesn't take much for people to not be interested in the weather. People already don't care about the weather, so to confuse them even a little bit is to kind of blow off their interest in a lot of ways. And this goes along with the next finding number 6, which found that there were several instances that meteorological phrases were used more often than layman's terms. Specifically, there was instances of meteorologists live on air that were using the terms wedge tornado, and they kept saying all severe modes possible. A lot of weather enthusiasts naturally know what those two things mean, but if you're saying that to the general public, they don't often know what a wedge tornado is. That's not common knowledge, and we cannot assume that it's common knowledge. That's when people get confused. So it's extremely important that very basic terminology is used so that everyone is on the same page, everybody can understand at the same level. This is the external response summary in the National Weather Service report that's been done. This is kind of shady, y'all are gonna like this. Okay, and it says, quote, "The overall spotter and emergency management response was mixed. There were examples of excellent emergency management operations, such as Black Hawk County." So Black Hawk County was one that performed exceptionally well with the National Weather Service. It then goes on to say, "The Butler County emergency manager had no direct role or function in the tornado event during the warning phase." The Butler County emergency manager for Parkersburg was MIA during the tornado warning. Earlier, the National Weather Service had tried to call Butler County about the warning, and the emergency manager was on the road driving somewhere. They actually had no idea that the tornado was happening in Parkersburg at the time. Not only that, they still weren't coordinating with the National Weather Service until several hours after the event had already been over. So it's interesting that even the National Weather Service themselves notes that in their external review. They don't say lack of cooperation, but they certainly don't portray it in a good light either. Just pretty shady. One positive, though, I will note about Parkersburg before this event is that the county had actually installed brand new tornado sirens and tested them the day before the Parkersburg tornado. I think it actually really could have saved lives having a brand new tornado siren. I don't want to focus too much on the findings here. These were just two that I found to be really interesting, but there's an entire list of findings in this report. Like I said, it's about 50 some odd pages, so if you're interested, I do recommend you go read it for yourself. The response to the call for help to Parkersburg was immense. Volunteers from outside Parkersburg, outside of the county, outside of the state, and even outside of the country, all these people came flocking to Parkersburg to help in any way they could. Over 175 National Guard troops would be brought in. The Red Cross also very quickly came in to aid, providing food to emergency workers and residents. And within just a few days, a mobile recovery center was actually opened to help get victims back on their feet. President Bush would visit Parkersburg in the next few days and declaring Butler County a disaster area. And this is really important because it allows for federal and state aid to really come in for the victims. This makes grants available for temporary housing, home repairs, and low-cost loans for people with uninsured properties. And on top of that, it helps businesses get the loans and help they need to get back on their feet. Most of the damage that came from the Parkersburg tornado was to homes. That took up a majority of it, but there were also 2 banks, the elementary school, the Applington High School, and the church that were destroyed, which would all have to be rebuilt. But the people of Parkersburg, despite having so much damage, were still thankful that a lot of the essential parts of Parkersburg remained untouched. And namely, that was the downtown area where the essential businesses were located. That area was virtually untouched, and on top of that, the water tower and pump also were untouched, which meant the people who still had homes and the businesses in Parkersburg were still able to have running water, were able to use the restroom and have showers, which is something people often do not have in areas of major devastation like this, which, as you can imagine, is really detrimental to people trying to rebuild. Shortly after the debris cleanup began, and that naturally lasts for months on end, it's never as simple as just cleaning up and starting anew. It's always a really long and difficult process with many external variables that aren't typically discussed. If you think about it, you have to now find accommodations for hundreds of people, how they're going to clean up the debris. Are the essential businesses like the banks and grocery stores intact? Is insurance going to cover all of the expenses necessary to rebuild? How long are you going to be able to find accommodations for? These are so many variables that aren't often talked about, but this is a process that goes on for months and months, and oftentimes up to a year or more. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's obviously a very painstaking process to lose your home, a very traumatic process, and you have to figure out how to start back your life from the ground up. I think when we look at this, it's almost really hard to understand where you would even start. Half of the town is homeless. And for me, when I think about this, I think of a lot of the examples of towns that are destroyed, and a lot of people, understandably so, will just move away and find somewhere else to live. But nobody in Parkersburg did that. The people of Parkersburg got right to work. You can kind of tell that people were immediately ready to move on, to get going, to rebuild their lives, and to not let this deter them even for a second. Fortunately, a lot of people built back with storm shelters as well, which I always really like to hear. One of the biggest goals and subsequent accomplishments of Parkersburg rebuilding was that they wanted to have their high school football team's first game by the next season. And it's May, so they wanted to have their first game by the fall time, which was, of course, a really tight deadline, but they did it. Within just 100 days, the Parkersburg high school football team would end up having their first game. And let me tell you why that's so important. Parkersburg has produced multiple NFL players, and so when we talk about the significance of rebuilding something like an area for them to play football, it's really the lifeblood of their town. It's so important to them. It's important to a lot of small towns, but Parkersburg specifically, having this goal and to be able to attain it so quickly was a really incredible thing for them to have accomplished.
I was very naive to how long lasting the emotional side of a tornado can be. So great care and concern had to be taken to make sure our families were thought of and taken care of for the long term. In the short term, it was just getting word out that we were going to have a school. We weren't going to send our kids to another town, that we were going to stay right here in Parkersburg.
And not only that, just a little over a year after the tornado hit, the Applington Parkersburg High School would be rebuilt back better than ever. And in fact, inside the school lies a clock from the old building, one that stopped on May 25th, 2008 at 4:56 p.m. exactly when the school was hit. So they took that old clock and put it in the new school as sort of a symbolic gesture that anyone can look at as they go in. The city would also rebuild Miracle Park, which was largely destroyed in the tornado, thanks to the help of volunteers, students, and the entire community, which would fundraise over $250,000 to do so. Parkersburg did rebuild just as it was before. And I don't want to gloss over this. The people of Parkersburg undoubtedly suffered a lot. This was a year of painstaking rebuilding, of losing your home, your possessions, to have to wonder if you're going to be able to financially afford all the things that need to be done. It's really a lot, and I don't ever mean to quickly go over it because it's a huge undertaking. I have to say what the people of Parkersburg did was so commendable. Being able to keep high spirits despite the fact that their town had just been destroyed, and they were able to really quickly start moving on and rebuilding.
This was the day we were born for. Are we going to respond? Are we going to use our training and resources? Or are we going to fail? And my football coach told me a long time ago, you don't fail.
Now, in 2010, the next census of the population after the tornado, just a few years later, there was a 1% decline from the prior census, but really not much of a change. People didn't leave Parkersburg, and that was apparent. Parkersburg never rebuilt any grand structures. They never built any major new buildings. Parkersburg simply rebuilt what was lost. And honestly, I think that's one of my favorite parts of this story. Parkersburg is really interesting to me because as a very small town, a devastating tornado is very much a make or break situation. You'll see events like Greensburg, where no matter what painstaking effort is taken, people simply leave because of the level of devastation or because they're trying to force something new on the town that they didn't really want before. Or sometimes you'll see some place like Joplin where they took a devastating event and really took off and thrived, and their population is like doubling because of it. But Parkersburg is very unique to me because it remains almost exactly the same as it was before. Small and quiet, and just the quaint town of Parkersburg, exactly how the people wanted it, and I love that so much. Despite having rebuilt though, scars on Parkersburg do still remain. In the lower third portion of town, where large trees once adorned the area, lies saplings. having grown some, but not as mature as the older trees that were there, showing a striking difference between what used to be and what now is. There is a memorial to the victims in Parkersburg. It's a lovely bench that features all of the names and pictures of those lives lost in the tornado. There's also a memorial, which is a large rock, which is dedicated to the volunteers and people who all came out to help Parkersburg rebuild. Even outside of the ones lost on that day, every single person that lived in Parkersburg at the time was impacted in some way, whether they lost their home, whether they lost a loved one. They all went through and experienced this trauma together, and they rebuilt together. This bonding, lifelong experience that very, very few people will ever be able to understand. And I think that's one of the main reasons why Parkersburg was able to so easily overcome adversity like they did. I always love to talk about rebuilding because it's the part where you get to really see the character of the town, how people overcome. You really get to see the humanity of people really shine through, and Parkersburg is such a good example of that. Overall, the unwavering spirit of Parkersburg has really left an impression on me as being one of my favorite stories of recovery. It's got to be one of the most insightful and well-documented tornadoes that's not talked about as much, and I wouldn't have been able to come across all of this if it wasn't for you guys recommending it to me, so thank you so much. So yeah, that is today's video, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you have any comments, leave them down below. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up for me. If you would like daily updates from me, you can follow my Twitter here. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.